The jet bridge door was already closing when the shouting started. "Ma'am, you need to step away from that seat, right now." The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. A glass of ice rattled softly against crystal. Somewhere toward the back, a baby stopped crying as if even the sound itself had been warned to stay quiet. In the front row seat, 1A, a white-haired man in a navy blazer, half stood, half blocked the aisle with his arm. His face flushed, his jaw clenched. In front of him, still standing, was a black woman. No one had noticed until that moment. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She was simply there, calm, upright, unmoving. The plane had not even pushed back yet, and already it felt like something irreversible had begun. Her name was Renee Walker. She was 50 years old, though nothing about her posture suggested the softness people expected at that age. She wore a charcoal coat, unbuttoned, sensible shoes, no jewelry except a thin gold band worn smooth with time. Her hair was pulled back, neatly practical, no attempt to impress anyone. If you glanced quickly, you might have mistaken her for a school administrator or a hospital supervisor flying home after a long shift. The man blocking her seat did not glance quickly. He looked her up and down, slowly, deliberately, the way people did when they believed evaluation itself was a form of authority. "This seat is taken," he said loud enough for others to hear. "You're holding up the boarding process." Renee did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She held out her boarding pass. Steady fingers, the paper flat, not shaking. "This is my seat," she said. Her voice was even, almost gentle. 1A. The man did not take the ticket. He scoffed instead, a sound thick with disbelief. "That's impossible. I've been flying this route for 20 years. That seat is always mine. Always." The word lingered heavy, familiar to anyone who had ever been told they did not belong somewhere they had paid to be. A few rows back, a woman in her early 70s leaned toward her husband and whispered something sharp into his ear. He frowned, glanced at Renee, then away, as if eye contact itself carried risk. Across the aisle, a younger businessman pretended to scroll through his phone while recording with the camera angled just enough to capture everything. The flight attendant arrived late to the conflict breath, slightly shallow smile, already fixed in place. His name tag read Jason. Early 30s. New shoes. The kind of man who wanted peace more than justice and thought the two were the same thing. "Okay," Jason said quickly, palms open. "Let's slow this down. Sir, let me see your boarding pass. Ma'am, I'll check yours as well." Renee handed hers over without comment. The man slapped his pass into Jason's hand as if proving a point. Jason scanned the screen on his tablet, his brow furrowed, his eyes flicked up, then down again. The silence stretched. The air felt thick like before a summer storm. "All right," Jason said, voice careful. "Sir, your assigned seat is 1B. The aisle. 1A belongs to Ms. Walker." The man's face darkened. He laughed once sharply. "That's not correct. I requested the window months ago." Jason swallowed. He glanced at Renee, then back at the man. The calculation happened in real time, written plainly across his face. "Who is louder?" Who looks like trouble? Who will complain? Who will not? Well, Jason said, lowering his voice as if offering a favor. We do have another window seat available a few rows back. Ms. Walker. Would you be willing to move so we can get everyone seated and depart on time? The words landed wrong. Everyone felt it. Even Jason knew it the moment they left his mouth. Renee did not respond immediately. She looked at Jason, really looked at him. Not angry. Not pleading. Measuring. She saw the fear behind his eyes. The training manuals. The unspoken rule that disruption was worse than injustice as long as it kept the schedule intact. No, she said quietly. The man blocking the seat snorted. See, she's being difficult. A low murmur rippled through the cabin. A man near the bulkhead shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. She paid for that seat, he said not loudly, but enough. He wore a faded ball cap and the posture of someone who had learned long ago how to hold ground without raising his voice. Jason stiffened. The situation was no longer small. Renee reached for the armrest of seat 1A, resting her hand there as if claiming not just fabric and foam but principle. Her fingers pressed lightly. She could feel the faint vibration of the aircraft beneath her palm. A machine designed for order. Precision. Rules. Rules that people bent when it suited them. Sir Jason said again this time to the man, "I need you to move to your assigned seat." The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm not moving. I paid good money for this ticket, and I am not sitting in the aisle so she can play first class for a night." There it was. Bare, unvarnished, ugly in its honesty. Renee felt it land in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. Not shock, not pain. Recognition. She had heard versions of that sentence her entire life, in boardrooms, in donor meetings, in quiet offices where men spoke to her assistant instead of to her. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Control was not weakness, it was preparation. Behind her, the boarding door remained open. The jet bridge hummed faintly. Time was bleeding away. Jason touched his earpiece, eyes darting. "I'm going to call my lead," he said. "Let's just take a breath." The man scoffed again, folding his arms. Finally. Renee said nothing, but her mind was already moving faster than anyone else in that cabin could imagine. Not toward anger, toward consequence. She knew exactly what this aircraft was equipped with. She knew the compliance protocols. She knew the names of the people who would receive the incident report once the words passenger refusal and harassment were typed into the system. And she knew one other thing, too. Something no one in that cabin knew yet. This flight was not just carrying passengers. It was carrying leverage. Jason stepped away, voice low, into his headset. The murmurs grew. Phones lifted higher. Somewhere, a camera light blinked red. Renee stood perfectly still, hand still resting on the armrest of seat 1. Eyes forward, breathing steady as the plane waited on the ground, engines silent. Seconds stretching thin. No one realized yet that the delay had already begun. The lead flight attendant arrived with the kind of calm that came from years of extinguishing small fires before they became disasters. Her name was Carol Hughes, late 40s, grey threaded deliberately through dark hair, not hidden, not highlighted. She stood with her shoulders squared, feet planted just wide enough to signal that whatever happened next would not be improvised. She took in the scene in one sweep of her eyes, the man blocking seat 1. Their arms crossed, Jason standing slightly behind him, too eager. Renee still upright, hand resting on the armrest, as if anchoring herself to something solid. "What's going on?" Carol asked, not a question, so much as a request for truth. Jason spoke first, too quickly. "There's a seating issue. Sir is assigned 1B, but prefers 1A. Ms. Walker has 1A on her boarding pass, but declined to move to another seat." Carol's eyes flicked to Renee. They lingered there a half-second longer than necessary. Not with suspicion, with curiosity. And why would she, Carol asked, move from her assigned seat? The man laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Because it's common sense. I've been flying longer than she's been alive. I know how this works." Carol turned her head slowly toward him. Her face did not change. Only her eyes hardened slightly the way ice did just before cracking. "Sir," she said, "how long you've been flying doesn't override what's printed on your boarding pass." He waved a hand. "Look, I don't have time for this. I have a connection in London and a meeting in the morning. Can you just fix this?" Fix this. The phrase hung there, loaded vague, implying that the fix would involve erasing the problem rather than addressing it. Carol inhaled once deep and controlled. "The fix," she said, "is you sitting in your assigned seat." The man's face flushed. "I want to speak to the captain." The request changed the temperature in the cabin instantly. Even the hum of the air system seemed to dim. Carol did not hesitate. "I'll let her know," she said, already pressing the button on her intercom. Her voice was low, precise. No emotion wasted. "Flight deck. This is Carol. We have a passenger refusing crew instructions in first class." Refusing crew instructions. The phrase was not dramatic. It was procedural. And everyone who understood aviation knew exactly what it meant. Renee shifted her weight slightly, just enough to relieve the tension in her calves. She had been standing longer than anyone realized. The man noticed the movement and mistook it for weakness. "That's right," he said louder now. "She's causing a disruption." Renee turned her head toward him for the first time. Her eyes were steady, dark, unflinching. When she spoke, her voice did not rise, but it carried. "I have not raised my voice. I have not insulted you. I have not refused any instruction. I am standing here because you are in my seat." The man scoffed, but something flickered behind his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first crack in the assumption that this woman would fold if pressed hard enough. A few rows back, the older woman who had whispered earlier shook her head openly now. "Unbelievable," she muttered, though it was not clear at whom her disgust was aimed. Jason stood uselessly to the side, hands clasped in front of him, like a boy waiting for a scolding. Minutes passed, not many, but enough for tension to coagulate. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Laura Bennett stepped into the aisle with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to announce herself. Early 50s. Tall. Hair pulled back tight, no strand out of place. Her uniform fit like it had been tailored to her spine. Her eyes were sharp, assessing already absorbing the imbalance in the room. She stopped just short of the front row. "Carol," she said evenly. "Bring me up to speed." Carol summarized in 2 sentences. No embellishment, no apology. Captain Bennet nodded once. Then she turned to the man in front of seat 1A. Sir, is it correct that you are assigned seat 1B? Yes, he said. And is it correct that you have been instructed by my crew to move to that seat? Yes, and have you done so? The man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No. Captain Bennet held his gaze. Then you are refusing a direct crew instruction. That's ridiculous, he snapped. This is a misunderstanding. It is not, the captain said. It is very clear. She turned slightly toward Renee. Ma'am, is this your seat? Yes, Renee replied. Do you have your boarding pass? Renee handed it over. Captain Bennet glanced at it for half a second, then handed it back. Thank you. She faced the man again. You will move to seat 1B now. The man laughed, a brittle sound. Or what? The cabin went dead silent. Even the phones lowered. No one wanted to be caught recording what came next. Or Captain Bennet said, voice steady as steel, this aircraft will not depart with you on it. The man blinked. You're threatening to remove me. I am informing you of procedure, she replied. Non-compliance with crew instructions is a safety issue. Renee watched the man's face change. The arrogance faltered, replaced by calculation. How far could he push? How much power did he really have? Before he could respond, he leaned toward Renee, lowering his voice, but not enough. You think you've won something, he said. You don't even know who you're dealing with. Renee did not respond. She did not need to. Her silence was not surrender. It was restraint. Captain Bennet saw it. She saw the difference between someone posturing and someone containing something much larger. Sir, she said sharply, that is enough. The man straightened, hands clenched. For a moment, it seemed he might finally move. But pride is a dangerous thing when cornered. No, he said. I'm not moving, and I want this documented. Captain Bennet nodded once. It will be. She turned to Carol. Contact operations. Tell them we have a refusal and harassment incident in first class. Hold departure. Jason's head snapped up. Hold departure. Yes, the captain said. We are not pushing back. The words rippled through the cabin like a shock wave. Renee felt the shift immediately. This was no longer a private conflict. This was now a systemic moment. Paperwork, reports, names logged. She reached into her coat pocket, slowly, deliberately, and removed her phone. Not with urgency, with intent. Captain Bennet noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not in suspicion, in recognition. People who panicked fumbled. People who knew where this was going moved calmly. Renee unlocked the screen and selected a contact. Not labeled by name, just a single initial. Before she pressed call, she looked at Captain Bennet. Captain, she said quietly, I need you to understand something. The captain met her gaze. Go ahead. I did not come here looking for a confrontation, Renee said. But what just happened goes beyond a seat. This aircraft is operating under compliance standards that intersect with my work. Captain Bennet's posture shifted subtly. What kind of work? Renee did not answer directly. She pressed the call button. The line connected almost immediately. A voice came through, calm, familiar, unhurried. "Renee, you're not airborne yet." A muscle in Captain Bennett's jaw tightened. "No," Renee said. "We're delayed, and it's about to become official." The man in front of Seat 1A felt it then. Not fear, something worse. The sensation of having stepped onto ground that was never his to begin with. Renee lowered the phone slightly, just enough for the captain to hear. "I'm on your aircraft," she said into the speaker. "And we have a compliance issue in first class." Captain Bennett held her breath as the voice on the other end changed tone. "Which aircraft?" Renee didn't hesitate. "This one." The cabin seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves leaned inward to listen. And for the first time since boarding began the man blocking Seat 1. I realized the flight was no longer waiting on him. It was waiting on her. The voice on the phone did not raise itself. It did not need to. "Who is the captain on that aircraft?" it asked. Captain Laura Bennett answered before Renee could. "Laura Bennett. And before you ask, yes, the aircraft is still at the gate." There was a pause on the line. Not silence. Consideration. The kind that carried weight. "Thank you, Captain," the voice said. "Please stay where you are. I'm pulling the live compliance feed now." Renee ended the call without ceremony and slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. She did not look at the man blocking her seat. She did not look at Jason. Her eyes rested briefly on Carol, the lead attendant, who met her gaze and for the first time nodded almost imperceptibly. Captain Bennett turned to Carol. "Jet bridge stays attached. No pushback. Notify ground control we're holding for an internal review." Carol didn't ask why. She already knew the words internal review were never used lightly. She turned and moved quickly toward the intercom. The man laughed again, but it sounded wrong this time. Thin. Forced. "This is insane. You're grounding a flight over a seat dispute." Captain Bennett's head snapped toward him. "I am holding a flight due to non-compliance and harassment." "That's not harassment," he shot back. "That's a disagreement." Renee spoke without turning. "Disagreements don't involve stripping people of dignity." The man bristled. "You don't get to decide that." "I don't," Renee said. "The system does." A low chime echoed through the cabin as the intercom activated. Carol's voice came on calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are experiencing a brief delay prior to departure. Please remain seated." Murmurs rose immediately. Confusion. Frustration. A woman in business class checked her watch and sighed audibly. Someone near the aisle muttered about missed connections. Captain Bennett stood unmoving at the front of the cabin, hands clasped behind her back, gaze forward. She had taken control of aircraft emergencies before. Medical events, mechanical warnings, weather diversions. This was different. This was quieter. And somehow heavier. Jason hovered near the galley, pale eyes darting. He had begun to understand that this was not a moment that would fade with a few apology vouchers. The man finally stepped away from Seat 1A, but only far enough to lean against the bulkhead arms crossed tight across his chest. "I want everything you're doing documented," he said. "Names, times, statements, they are being documented." Captain Bennett replied. Renee exhaled slowly. She could feel the eyes on her now. The shift had happened. Curiosity replacing dismissal. People sensed gravity before they understood cause. Behind her, the jet bridge door hissed as pressure adjusted. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, machinery moved. Deliberate. Official. A ground operations manager boarded next a man in his 40s with a tablet held close to his chest like a shield. His name tag read, Michael Reynolds. He stopped short when he saw the captain, then the man, then Renee. Captain, he said quietly. Michael. Captain Bennett replied. We have a refusal and harassment situation that has escalated into compliance review. Michael nodded. His eyes flicked to Renee again. Something in her posture gave him pause. He lowered his voice. We've received a flag from corporate. The man's head snapped up. Corporate. For what? Michael ignored him. He stepped closer to the captain. We've been instructed to pause all departure activity until further notice. A ripple of reaction moved through the cabin, stronger this time. This was no longer a brief delay. Renee shifted finally, taking a half step back from the seat, not relinquishing it, but making space. Her calves burned slightly. She welcomed the sensation. It kept her grounded. The man leaned forward, pointing at her. This is because of you. Renee turned slowly to face him fully. Her expression was not angry. It was weary. No, she said. This is because of choices. He scoffed, but his eyes betrayed him. The confidence had cracked. He looked around, now noticing the distance others had placed between themselves and him. No one nodded in agreement anymore. Captain Bennett addressed the cabin again, her voice steady. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are awaiting further instructions. A woman near the window whispered to her husband. What on earth is happening? He shook his head. I don't know, but it's not small. Minutes passed. Not long in real time. Endless in perception. Michael's tablet chimed softly. He read lips tightening. He turned to the captain. We have authorization to begin security protocol review. Captain Bennett nodded once. Understood. The man straightened. Security? Are you accusing me of something now? No, the captain said. We are responding to escalation. Renee felt the aircraft change around her. Not physically, psychologically. The plane was no longer a vehicle. It was a contained system under examination. A uniformed airport security officer appeared at the front of the cabin, followed by another. Their presence was calm, practiced, not aggressive, but final. The man's voice rose. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. The taller officer addressed him. Sir, we need you to step into the aisle. The man hesitated. His eyes darted toward Renee, then away. Am I being removed? That depends on your cooperation, the officer replied. Renee watched without satisfaction, without relief. This was not victory. This was consequence unfolding. Jason swallowed hard, staring at the floor. Carol stood beside the captain now, her expression unreadable. The officer gestured again. Sir. The man stepped forward, shoulders stiff. I want to file a complaint. You will have that opportunity, the officer said. As he passed Renee, he leaned close, voice low, bitter. You think you're special. Renee met his gaze one last time. I think everyone deserves the same rules. His mouth twisted. He looked away. The officers guided him toward the jet bridge. The door opened. Cool air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of fuel and rain. The cabin watched in stunned silence as he disappeared from view. The door closed again with a heavy, unmistakable thud. Michael exhaled. I'll coordinate with operations, he said to the captain. We're officially grounded pending review. Captain Bennett nodded. Thank you. Renee finally sat down in seat 1A. Slowly, deliberately. The leather was cool against her back. She closed her eyes for half a second, not in triumph, but in recalibration. The aircraft was still on the ground. The consequences were still moving. And somewhere beyond the walls of the cabin, forces far larger than a single passenger were now awake. The delay had become irreversible. The announcement did not come immediately, and that delay made it worse. Passengers shifted in their seats, the early irritation sharpening into something heavier, something edged with fear and suspicion. A grounded aircraft after boarding was never routine. People who had flown for decades knew that. This was not weather. This was not a late baggage cart. This was procedural, and procedural meant paperwork, investigations, consequences. Renee sat still in seat 1. Her hands folded loosely in her lap. The leather creaked faintly as she adjusted her shoulders. Across the aisle, the empty seat 1B felt louder than any argument that had come before it. An absence that told its own story. Jason stood frozen near the galley, eyes glassy, replaying the last 20 minutes on a relentless loop. He could still hear his own voice offering champagne, as if courtesy could erase harm. He felt exposed now, stripped of the protection that routine usually provided. He had followed what he thought was common sense. He was beginning to understand that common sense, when built on fear, was its own kind of failure. Carol leaned toward the captain. Operations is asking for a preliminary statement. Captain Bennett nodded. They'll get it. Facts only. Renee listened without turning her head. Facts mattered, but context mattered more. The intercom clicked on again. Captain Bennett's voice filled the cabin, calm, firm, unmistakably in control. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Due to a compliance issue that requires review, this aircraft will remain at the gate for the time being. We understand the inconvenience and will provide updates as soon as possible. A wave of reaction rolled back through the cabin. Groans. Sharp exhales. A few raised voices quickly silenced by the reality that nothing could be done. A man 3 rows back leaned into the aisle. How long is this going to take? Captain Bennett met his gaze. As long as it needs to. That answer landed with finality. Renee felt the eyes again, heavier now, curious in a different way. People were beginning to connect the shape of the disruption to the stillness of the woman in the front row. Power was not always loud, but it was always felt. Michael Reynolds returned from the jet bridge tablet tucked under his arm. His expression had shifted from operational focus to something closer to caution. He approached the captain, lowering his voice. Corporate compliance wants confirmation. The passenger in 1A is Renee Walker. Captain Bennett did not look surprised. She nodded once. That's correct. Michael's jaw tightened. That changes things. It clarifies things, the captain replied. Michael glanced at Renee, then back at the captain. They're escalating this to a formal incident review. Crew actions included. Jason flinched. Carol noticed. Said nothing. Renee finally turned her head slightly, addressing Michael without raising her voice. I'm not interested in spectacle, she said. I'm interested in accuracy. Michael hesitated, then nodded. Understood. The cabin door opened again, slower this time. Another figure stepped aboard, older, composed, wearing a dark suit instead of a uniform. He introduced himself quietly to the captain. Thomas Green, Corporate Security. The presence of corporate security changed the temperature again. This was no longer about customer service. This was about liability. Thomas surveyed the cabin, his gaze pausing briefly on Renee, then moving on. We'll need to conduct brief interviews with crew before departure, he said. It shouldn't take long. Do it efficiently, Captain Bennett said. This is a long-haul flight. Thomas nodded. Yes, Captain. Jason was the first, pulled aside. Carol watched him go, shoulders hunched, steps unsteady. She recognized the look. It was the look of someone realizing too late that neutrality was not the same as professionalism. Renee closed her eyes again, just for a moment. The hum of the aircraft systems blended into a low, steady presence. She thought of the many rooms she had stood in over the years, where decisions were made quietly behind closed doors, insulated from the human cost. This was different. This was visible. Public. And that mattered. A woman across the aisle leaned toward Renee cautiously. Excuse me, she said, voice low. I just wanted to say I'm glad you stood your ground. Renee opened her eyes and met the woman's gaze. She offered a small nod. Not gratitude. Recognition. Thank you, Renee said simply. The woman hesitated. People don't always do that. Renee looked forward again. That's why systems fail. Minutes passed. Conversations softened. Phones buzzed. Messages were sent. Stories began forming before the facts had fully landed. Thomas returned, speaking quietly to the captain. Security is satisfied. The passenger has been officially removed and documented. Crew interviews are underway. Captain Bennett nodded. What about departure? Thomas exhaled. Corporate wants confirmation from compliance before release. Renee listened. She knew that voice. Corporate caution. It was necessary, but it was also slow. Time was something she did not have in abundance. She reached for her phone again. Movements measured. This time she did not put it on speaker. She held it to her ear. Yes, she said when the call connected. I'm aware. A pause. Her eyes softened slightly. I understand the process. I'm asking you to weigh the cost of delay against the reason for it. Another pause. Longer. Renee's voice remained calm. The issue that required review has been addressed. What remains is precedent, and precedent is only valuable if it does not become paralysis. Captain Bennett watched her now, listening without hearing the other side of the conversation. She recognized command when she saw it. Not the loud kind, the kind that moved things without friction. Renee nodded once. Thank you. She ended the call and placed the phone back in her lap. Captain Bennett raised an eyebrow. Progress. Yes, Renee said. But not permission. Thomas glanced between them. His tablet chimed again. He read quickly, then looked up. Compliance has cleared us pending final paperwork. We have authorization to prepare for departure. A collective release of breath swept the cabin, subtle but unmistakable. Captain Bennett straightened. Carol, notify the cabin. Jason will remain off duty until further notice. Carol nodded, relief and gravity sharing space in her expression. Jason stood nearby, pale eyes rimmed red. He met Renee's gaze briefly, then looked away. Shame burning hot and immediate. Renee did not gloat. She did not soften. Accountability was not cruelty. The intercom chimed. Carol's voice followed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have been cleared to prepare for departure. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Movement resumed. Bags shifted. The aircraft felt alive again, systems awakening. Captain Bennett remained at the front until the jet bridge retracted. The heavy thud echoed through the cabin, sealing the moment. As the engines began to spool, Renee leaned back in her seat. Eyes closing once more, not from exhaustion, but from focus. The ground conflict was over. The air held different challenges. This was not the end of the story. It was the point of no return. The aircraft rolled forward with a low, deliberate rumble, the kind that vibrated through the bones before it reached the ears. Renee felt it through the soles of her shoes, up her spine, into her chest. Motion always did that to her. It reminded her that systems only mattered once they moved. On paper, everything worked. In motion, everything revealed itself. Outside the window, the lights of the terminal slid past in long streaks of white and amber. Ground crew figures blurred into silhouettes, then vanished. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, shifting the mood from confrontation to containment. People settled into their seats, adjusting pillows, straightening blankets, pretending the last hour had not happened. But pretending did not erase memory. Jason was no longer visible. Carol moved through the aisle with controlled efficiency, voice soft, posture composed, but her eyes missed nothing. She checked seatbelts overhead, bins faces. She paused briefly at Renee's row, not to speak, just to meet her eyes again. This time there was no curiosity. Only respect tempered by caution. Captain Bennett's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are number 2 for departure. Thank you for your patience. Number 2. That meant priority had shifted. Not emergency. Not favoritism. Something else. Renee noted it without reacting. As the plane turned toward the runway, a man across the aisle leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That woman up front, she didn't flinch once." His wife nodded slowly. People who flinch don't survive long in certain rooms. Renee heard them. She always heard more than people assumed. She let the words pass through her unclaimed. The engine spooled louder now, a controlled roar that swallowed thought. Renee pressed her head gently against the seat. Eyes closed, breathing steady as the aircraft accelerated. The pushback into her body was firm, relentless, familiar. Then the lift. Subtle at first, then undeniable. Chicago fell away beneath them, the city lights flattening into a grid, then dissolving into darkness. Only once the seatbelt sign chimed off did Renee open her eyes. She reached into her bag and removed a slim leather folder, worn at the edges unmarked. She did not open it yet. She placed it on the tray table and rested her hands on top of it, palms down, grounding herself. Carol approached quietly with a glass of water. No flourish, no apology, just acknowledgement. "Let me know if you need anything," she said. Renee nodded. "I will." As Carol moved on, Renee finally opened the folder. Inside were printed notes, diagrams, timelines. Not flashy, not polished. The kind of documents meant for people who understood consequences. She flipped one page, then another. Her phone vibrated softly. She did not look at the screen right away. Across the aisle, a man pretended to read a newspaper while watching her reflection in the darkened window. He had worked in logistics for 40 years. He recognized the posture. This was not a woman calming down. This was a woman gearing up. Renee picked up the phone and read the message. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not anger. Focus. She typed a brief response. 4 words. Then locked the screen. Somewhere ahead, beyond the cockpit door, Captain Bennett adjusted course, slightly fingers light on the controls. The flight plan had been amended, not drastically, just enough. The intercom chimed again, this time a softer tone. Cabin crew prepare for service. Movement resumed. The ritual of normalcy reasserted itself. Renee closed the folder and slid it back into her bag. For now. The man across the aisle leaned over again this time, addressing her directly. Voice low, respectful. "Ma'am," he said. "I just wanted to say some of us noticed what happened back there." Renee met his gaze. "I'm sure you did." He hesitated. It takes a certain kind of strength to stay that calm. She considered him for a moment. "It takes preparation," she said. "Calm is learned." He nodded slowly, as if filing the lesson away for later. As the cabin lights shifted fully into night mode, the atmosphere changed. Conversations dropped to whispers. Screens glowed. The aircraft entered that suspended space between places where time stretched and meaning sharpened. Renee allowed herself to lean back fully now. The tension in her shoulders eased, not because the situation was resolved, but because the next phase had begun. She thought of her father bent over engines in cold hangars, grease under his nails, patience carved into muscle memory. He had taught her that machines did not forgive assumptions. People made them. Systems magnified them. A chime sounded softly in her headset as the secure network initialized. She did not yet connect. There was still time. But not much. Carol returned this time with a meal tray. "We'll be serving shortly," she said. "If you prefer privacy, we can delay." Renee looked at her. Really looked at her. "Privacy will be appreciated," she said. Carol nodded. "Consider it done." Jason would have said the same thing an hour ago, but the difference was intent. Carol understood now what Jason had not then. Accommodation was not appeasement. Respect was not avoidance. Renee unfolded her napkin and placed it aside without eating. Hunger was irrelevant. Her mind was already several steps ahead. Her phone vibrated again. This time she answered. Yes, she said quietly. The voice on the other end spoke rapidly. Efficient. Concerned. Renee listened without interrupting. No, she said finally. Not yet. A pause. Because timing matters, she continued. Let them feel the delay. Let them understand the cost. Another pause. Renee's gaze drifted to the window, to the endless dark punctuated by distant stars. We're not reacting, she said. We're setting terms. She ended the call and set the phone face down. In the cabin, someone laughed softly at a movie joke. Someone else snored lightly. Life in all its small, ordinary rhythms pressed on. Renee sat in the center of it, composed, unremarkable to the untrained eye. But beneath the surface, currents moved. Decisions were being made in offices thousands of miles away. Emails were being drafted. Protocols reviewed. Names flagged. The incident on this flight was already spreading through systems that did not care about tone or intention-only documentation. Renee had not planned for this confrontation, but she had planned for what came after. She closed her eyes again, not to rest, but to narrow her focus. The reveal would not come in a dramatic announcement or a raised voice. It would come in consequences, in shifts that could not be undone. The aircraft cruised steadily. Now lights dim, engines humming with mechanical certainty. Below them, the Atlantic waited. Ahead of them, something far larger than a stolen seat was already unfolding. The first sign that the flight was no longer ordinary came quietly, the way real shifts always did. A subtle change in cabin rhythm, a pause in the service cart's progress, a glance exchanged between Carol and another attendant that lasted a fraction longer than necessary. Renee noticed it all without lifting her head. Patterns spoke louder than announcements. She opened her laptop only after the cabin settled fully into cruise. The screen woke without ceremony. No logos, no fanfare. Just a clean interface and a single prompt waiting. She placed her fingers on the keyboard and hesitated, not from doubt, but from timing. Outside the wing, cut through the night, navigation lights blinking red and green, like a slow heartbeat. Across the aisle, the logistics man pretended to sleep. He wasn't. He had tilted his head just enough to watch her reflection in the darkened window. He had seen executives before. Not like this. They usually arrived with noise, with assistance, with the smell of entitlement. This woman moved like an engineer, not a ruler. Inputs, outputs, consequences. Renee typed a single line and pressed enter. Somewhere far below, a server cluster responded. Not instantly. Responsibly. Data began to populate the screen in restrained blocks. Status indicators, risk flags. A narrow red bar blinked once, then held steady. She leaned back, exhaled, and closed the laptop again. Not yet. Her phone vibrated this time longer, insistently. She answered without looking. "You're airborne," the voice said. "Yes." And the cabin contained. A pause. "The incident report is moving faster than expected." "It should," Renee said. "It intersects with federal guidelines." Another pause. This one carried calculation. "You're certain you want to proceed?" Renee looked down the aisle, past the dim glow of screens, and the soft rise and fall of sleeping passengers. She thought of the man who had blocked her seat, not with anger, with clarity. "Yes," she said. "Proceed." The call ended. Carol approached again, quieter than before. She knelt slightly beside Renee's seat, voice low. "Captain Bennett would like a word when you're ready." Renee nodded. "Now is fine." Carol moved away, and moments later Captain Bennett emerged from the cockpit. She did not look rushed. She did not look tense. She looked alert, the way pilots did when variables changed, but control remained. She stopped beside Renee's seat. "May I sit?" Renee gestured to the empty one. "B. Please." The captain sat hands folded, posture precise. For a moment neither spoke. The aircraft hummed around them, oblivious. "I received confirmation from compliance," Captain Bennett said, finally. "The passenger removed earlier has filed a formal grievance." Renee inclined her head slightly. "I expected that. They're claiming wrongful removal." "They always do." Captain Bennett studied her. "Corporate wants to understand your position." Renee met her gaze. "My position is that the removal was correct. The delay was necessary, and the failure that led to it was predictable." The captain's jaw tightened. Jason, Renee agreed, and the system that taught him that appeasement was professionalism. Captain Bennett exhaled slowly. "He's a good kid. So are many people who make dangerous decisions under pressure," Renee replied. Her tone was not cruel. It was factual. Silence settled again, deeper this time. "You know, Captain Bennett said most people with your level of influence would have ended this the moment it started." Renee's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. "Ending things quickly doesn't fix them." The captain nodded. "You're going to force a review." "I'm going to allow one to happen," Renee corrected. "The difference matters." Captain Bennett looked forward toward the cockpit door. "This airline prides itself on safety." "It should," Renee said. "Safety is not just mechanical." Another pause. "What happens next?" the captain asked. Renee considered her answer carefully. "Next, the data speaks. Training protocols will be examined. Incident response guidelines will be revised. Quietly, thoroughly. And the passenger." Renee did not hesitate. "He will discover that consequences do not need to be theatrical to be permanent." Captain Bennett nodded once. She stood. "Thank you for your candor." Renee watched her return to the cockpit, the door closing softly behind her. The logistics man across the aisle finally turned fully toward Renee. "You didn't just stop a problem," he said. "You triggered something." "Yes," Renee said. "That was the point." He shook his head slowly. "Most people wouldn't. Most people aren't positioned to..." Renee replied. The man absorbed that, then leaned back, chastened. Renee opened her laptop again. This time, she let it run. The red bar on the screen shifted, thinning, then resolving into a series of green confirmations. She scrolled eyes, scanning faster than anyone watching could follow. A message appeared. Internal. Time stamped. Formal. She read it once. Then again. Her phone vibrated almost immediately afterward. "Yes," she said. "We've identified a pattern," the voice on the other end said. "Not just this flight. 3 similar incidents in the last 18 months. Different routes. Same response behavior. Renee's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Documented. Partially. Most were resolved quietly. Renee closed her eyes briefly. Quiet resolution is how patterns survive. A beat. We'll need your authorization to proceed. You have it. Another pause. This one carried weight. This will be uncomfortable. Renee's eyes opened. Growth usually is. She ended the call. The cabin lights dimmed further as the aircraft entered deeper night. A few passengers stirred, unaware that policies affecting thousands of flights were shifting mid-air. Carol passed once more, this time slower, her movements less scripted. She paused again by Renee's seat. "If there's anything you need," she said. Renee looked up at her. "You handled today with integrity." Carol's throat tightened slightly. "I tried." "You succeeded," Renee said. Carol nodded and moved on shoulders straighter than before. Renee leaned back, closing her laptop for the final time. The work was in motion now. It no longer required her hands, only her presence. She looked out the window at the vast, unbroken darkness. Somewhere beneath them, currents shifted, invisible but powerful. The same was happening above. This flight would land like any other. No applause, no announcement. Most passengers would forget the delay within days. But systems would remember. And systems, once corrected, rarely returned to their old shape. Renee allowed herself a single quiet breath of satisfaction. Not triumph. Resolution. The reveal was not coming in words. It was already underway. Morning came without ceremony, a thin grey light bleeding across the cabin as the aircraft crossed the Atlantic's final stretch. Renee was already awake. She had not slept. Not from tension, but from awareness. Sleep came when systems were stable. This one was still shifting. Around her, the cabin stirred slowly. Window shades lifted in uneven waves. Someone stretched. Someone else rubbed their eyes and checked the time, surprised by how quickly night had passed. The earlier confrontation felt distant now, softened by altitude and routine, but its residue lingered in small ways. Fewer careless glances. Softer voices. A collective caution that had not been there before. Carol moved through the aisle again, quieter than usual, her expression focused, but changed. There was a steadiness to her now that had not existed the night before, as if something had clicked into place. She stopped briefly near Renee's seat, not to speak, just to offer a nod. Renee returned it. No words were needed. In the cockpit, Captain Bennett reviewed a new message that had arrived minutes earlier. She read it twice, then leaned back in her seat, eyes forward, absorbing the implication. She had flown for decades. She had seen emergencies, egos, weather that turned violent without warning. She had never seen a mid-flight compliance shift ripple this quickly. She keyed the intercom, hesitated, then turned it off again. Not yet. Renee felt the aircraft begin its gradual descent long before the announcement. The change in pitch, the subtle forward tilt. She closed her laptop and slid it into her bag. Movements unhurried. The work was complete for now. Across the aisle, the logistics man finally spoke again. His voice low, careful. "I've been thinking about last night," he said. Renee turned her head slightly. "That can be dangerous." He smiled faintly. "For some of us, it's overdue." She waited. I spent 40 years fixing supply chain failures, he continued. Everyone blamed breakdowns. No one wanted to admit the problem was the people making decisions under pressure. Renee nodded. Pressure doesn't create flaws. It exposes them. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. You changed something up here. Yes, she said. And it will keep changing. The seatbelt sign chimed on softly. Captain Bennett's voice followed composed professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into London. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Routine. Reassuring. Familiar. Renee fastened her belt and leaned back, gaze drifting once more to the window. The clouds below parted just enough to reveal muted greens and greys. Land. Structure. Boundaries returning. Her phone vibrated. She checked the message once, then locked the screen. Carol returned this time, carrying nothing. She paused, uncertain. When we land, she said quietly, there may be questions. Renee met her eyes. Answer what you can. Refer what you must. Carol nodded. Jason asked me to tell you he's sorry. Renee considered that. Tell him apology is a beginning, not an outcome. Carol's eyes softened. I will. The cabin fell into a focused silence as the aircraft descended through thickening cloud. A soft jolt of turbulence rattled cups and nerves alike. Renee remained still. Turbulence, she knew, was rarely the danger people thought it was. The real danger came from ignoring warning signs because they were inconvenient. The wheels touched down with a firm, clean thud. The moment carried weight. As the plane slowed, phones lifted again. Messages sent. Stories began to take shape, reshaped by perspective and bias. Renee stayed seated, waiting. She always waited. Rush created mistakes. The aircraft taxied past gates and service roads, then slowed further. This was not the usual path. Captain Bennett's voice returned, this time more deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, due to post-incident procedures, we will be taxiing to a secondary gate. Please remain seated until further instruction. Murmurs rose again, but softer now. Less outrage, more curiosity. When the aircraft finally stopped, the door did not open immediately. Renee felt the pause, the final breath before exposure. The jet bridge connected with a hollow thud. Then footsteps, measured, purposeful. The door opened. Two figures stood just outside. Not police, not security. Corporate liaisons. Dark suits, neutral expressions. They scanned the cabin once, then focused on the front row. One of them stepped forward, voice low but clear. Ms. Walker. Renee rose smoothly. Yes, if you'll come with us, please. She nodded and stepped into the aisle. The cabin watched in silence. This time, no one assumed guilt. Power had a different posture when it arrived this way. As Renee walked forward, Carol caught her eye. Thank you, Carol said quietly. Renee paused for just a moment. Remember this feeling, she replied. And don't lose it. Carol nodded, swallowing hard. Captain Bennett stood at the cockpit door. It was an honor, she said simply. Renee met her gaze. You did your job. They both understood what that meant. Renee stepped onto the jet bridge, the air cooler heavier. The noise of the terminal seeped in, distant but growing. The corporate liaisons fell into step beside her. "This won't be public," one of them said. "It doesn't need to be," Renee replied. "But there will be changes. There already are." They reached a quiet corridor away from the main terminal flow. Glass walls, muted light. Renee's reflection moved alongside her, steady, unremarkable. "Do you want transportation arranged?" the other liaison asked. "No," Renee said. "I'll walk." They hesitated, then nodded. Renee continued alone, footsteps echoing softly against polished floors. Travelers passed without recognition. That was fine. Visibility was not always power. Her phone vibrated one last time. She read the message and allowed herself a single, slow breath. Approved. Implement immediately. Behind her, the aircraft that had carried her across the Atlantic prepared for its next journey. Different crew, same systems, slightly altered. Renee reached the terminal doors and stepped into the morning. The story would not end with her name in a headline or a viral clip. It would end quietly, the way real change always did. In revised manuals, in retrained instincts, in moments when someone chose differently because the cost of doing otherwise had finally been made clear. She adjusted her coat and merged into the crowd, already thinking about what would come next. The seat had never been the point. The system had been listening. Now it had heard her. The meeting room overlooked the runway glass walls, humming faintly with the sound of engines spooling and braking beyond them. Renee stood at the window for a moment, before entering, watching a narrow-bodied jet pivot with the precision of a thought made real. Planes were honest that way. They did what the data told them to do, or they failed. There was no ego in aluminum. She turned and stepped inside. The room was long and spare. Polished table, neutral chairs, a screen dark at the far end, waiting. 3 people were already seated, each one arranged carefully in their own version of control. A man in a charcoal suit with the posture of finance. A woman with a legal pad aligned to the millimeter. A third with hands folded, eyes alert, the kind of presence that measured risk before opportunity. No one stood. That was fine. "Thank you for making time," Renee said, taking the seat at the head without asking. Her voice carried easily in the quiet. The man in charcoal nodded. "We understand the urgency." Renee rested her hands on the table, fingers relaxed. "Urgency is not why I'm here." A beat. The woman with the legal pad glanced up, pen hovering. "I'm here," Renee continued, "because the incident on that flight revealed a fault line. And fault lines don't stay still once they're exposed." The third person leaned back slightly. "We've reviewed the preliminary report. Preliminary reports describe what happened," Renee said. "They rarely explain why." Silence settled. It was not uncomfortable. It was expectant. Renee tapped the table once, and the screen behind her came to life. Not charts, not bullet points, a simple timeline. Dates, routes, short descriptions stripped of commentary. "These," she said, "are 12 incidents over the past 2 years. Different crews, different passengers, same pattern." The man in charcoal frowned. 12 is not statistically significant across our volume. "It is," Renee replied calmly, "when the outcome risk is not evenly distributed." She advanced the screen. Faces blurred, names redacted. The words "non-compliance accommodation" de-escalation, repeated like a quiet refrain. "The failure is not that your crews made mistakes," Renee said. "The failure is that they were trained to treat disruption as the enemy instead of inequity." The woman with the legal pad finally spoke. "We emphasize safety. You emphasize timeliness," Renee corrected. "Safety requires friction." Another beat. The third person nodded slowly as if something had clicked. Renee leaned forward slightly. On that flight, a junior attendant was taught that moving the quiet person was preferable to confronting the loud one. That is not neutrality. That is bias dressed as efficiency. The man in charcoal shifted. "What are you proposing?" Renee did not smile. "A recalibration." She advanced the screen again. New text appeared. Training modules, response thresholds, accountability loops, immediate changes, she said, not announcements, implementation, crew response protocols that remove discretion in situations involving dignity. If a passenger is compliant and ticketed correctly, they are never asked to move to accommodate misconduct. Ever. The legal pad pen scratched faster now. And when a crew member fails to follow that, the third person asked what, then? "Then the system responds," Renee said. "Not the individual. Retraining is automatic. Escalation is documented. Patterns are flagged before they metastasize." The room grew still. The man in charcoal cleared his throat. "This will slow operations." "Yes," Renee said. "It will also prevent lawsuits, reputational damage, and federal scrutiny." She let that settle. And she added, "It will cost you less than the alternative." The third person spoke again. "You're asking us to change culture." Renee met their gaze. "Culture changes whether you ask it to or not. The only question is who gets hurt while you're pretending it's stable." A quiet hum from the runway filtered through the glass. The man in charcoal leaned forward. "There's also the matter of the passenger removed." "There is," Renee agreed. "And your response was correct." The woman with the legal pad looked up sharply. "Correct." "Yes," Renee said. "You followed procedure once it was triggered. The problem was how long it took to trigger it." Silence again. Different now. Heavier. More honest. The third person folded their hands. "If we adopt this framework," they said, "it sets a precedent." Renee nodded. "That's the point." They exchanged looks. The man in charcoal sighed. "We'll need board approval." "You'll need courage," Renee said. "Approval follows courage when the math is clear." She tapped the screen once more. A final slide appeared. Not data. A single sentence. "Systems do not fail people. People design systems that fail people." Renee turned off the screen. "I'm not here as an adversary," she said. "I'm here as someone who understands how fragile trust is once it's been tested at scale." The woman with the legal pad closed it slowly. "If we move forward," she said, "will you support the rollout?" Renee nodded. "I already am." Another pause. Then the third person stood. "We'll take this to the board today." Renee rose as well. "Good." As she moved toward the door, the man in charcoal spoke again. "Ms. Walker." She turned. "You could have handled this privately," he said. "A phone call, a memo." Renee considered him. Private fixes keep public problems alive. She left the room without waiting for a response. Outside, the corridor buzzed with quiet urgency. Staff moved with purpose. Screens flickered with arrivals and departures. Life continued indifferent to the adjustments happening beneath it. Renee walked toward the exit coat over her arm, steps unhurried. Her phone vibrated once more. She checked it, then slid it away. Approved pending final vote. She paused near the window again, watching another aircraft lift cleanly into the pale morning sky. A small deviation corrected early, a smoother ascent. This was the work. Not applause, not vindication, alignment. She turned from the glass and disappeared into the terminal crowd, leaving behind a room full of people who now understood that the cost of ignoring quiet power was far greater than the inconvenience of listening to it. The story did not spread the way scandals usually did. There were no viral clips, no leaked audio, no grainy footage with captions screaming outrage. By the time the aircraft had completed its turnaround and departed again, the moment had already slipped into something quieter, harder to trace. That was deliberate. Renee knew how noise worked. It burned fast and left nothing usable behind. She walked through the terminal without escort coat draped over one arm, blending into the steady current of travelers. London moved differently than Chicago. Less urgency in the air. More restraint. People carried their authority inward instead of wearing it like armor. She appreciated that. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call, an internal alert. She glanced at it once and kept walking. Implementation Phase 1 initiated. She exhaled slowly, the first full breath she had taken since boarding the flight the night before. Outside, rain misted the pavement, turning headlights into blurred halos. She stepped into the back of a waiting cab without ceremony. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, nodded politely, and pulled into traffic. As the city slid past, Renee allowed herself to think backward. Not about the confrontation itself, but about the man who had blocked her seat. The way certainty had hardened his posture. The way his confidence had depended entirely on being unchallenged. She had seen that before in men twice his power and half his restraint. The cab slowed at a light. A pedestrian crossed slowly, umbrella tilted against the drizzle. Life went on. Her phone buzzed again. Phase 1 acknowledged by compliance. Phase 2 pending. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. There would be no speeches, no victory lap. The change would announce itself in subtle ways. A different tone in training sessions. A pause before a decision that once would have been rushed. A junior attendant who chose enforcement over appeasement because the system no longer rewarded fear. The cab stopped at a red light. The driver cleared his throat. Long night, he said, more observation than question. Yes, Renee replied. But productive. He nodded, satisfied with that. They arrived at her hotel without further conversation. Renee paid, stepped out into the cool air, and stood for a moment beneath the awning, listening to the rain. Her shoulders felt lighter, not because the work was done, but because it was moving without her having to push it anymore. Inside the lobby was quiet. Polished stone, low lighting. A few early risers nursing coffee. Renee checked in under her name without comment. The clerk did not recognize it. That too was fine. Up in her room, she set her bag down and crossed to the window. The city stretched out below, grey and patient. She thought of the countless flights moving through this airspace every day. The number of decisions made in seconds that carried weight far beyond the moment. Her phone buzzed again. She read the message twice. Board vote scheduled. Preliminary support unanimous. Renee allowed herself to sit down, then the edge of the bed cool beneath her palms. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. For the first time since the confrontation, she felt something like fatigue. Not physical, moral, the kind that came after holding a line long enough for it to matter. She stood again, shrugging it off. Fatigue was temporary. Systems endured. Later that morning, she entered another room. Smaller. Fewer people. A screen already lit. This meeting was not about the incident directly, but it was connected in ways that would not be documented in any report. Aviation safety, human factors, the spaces where protocol and behavior collided. The faces on the screen nodded as she spoke. They always did. Not because she demanded it, but because she spoke in outcomes instead of ideals. Midway through the meeting, her phone buzzed one final time. Passenger grievance dismissed. Permanent notation entered. She did not react outwardly. The man would move on. He always would. But he would do so carrying a weight he had not expected. Not shame. Accountability. The meeting concluded. Renee closed her laptop and sat still for a moment longer. Outside, the rain had slowed. The city brightened by degrees. She thought of Carol, of Jason, of Captain Bennett. People who would return to their routines, altered in ways they might not articulate, but would feel. That was how change lasted. It embedded itself in instinct. By afternoon, the board vote was complete. Framework adopted. Immediate rollout authorized. Renee read the confirmation and set the phone down. No celebration followed. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly. That evening she walked again. No destination in mind, just movement. The streets hummed with quiet life. Shop windows glowed. Conversations drifted past in fragments. Somewhere an aircraft passed overhead, unseen but present. She paused at a corner and looked up. The sky was clearing. Renee smiled then briefly to herself. Not because she had won, but because she had proven something old and easily forgotten. Power did not announce itself when it mattered most. It adjusted the world and let the world discover the difference on its own. Tomorrow, flights would depart with new rules quietly guiding them. Crews would act differently without fully knowing why. Passengers would be protected by decisions made far from their seats. And somewhere, a junior attendant would face a choice and choose correctly, not out of fear, but because the system finally stood behind them. Renee turned and walked on, disappearing into the city, as the consequences of a single refusal continued to unfold far beyond the cabin where it had begun. The morning after the board vote, the first memo went out quietly, stamped with effective immediately, and routed through channels most employees never saw. Renee read it on her phone while standing in line for coffee, surrounded by people who had no idea anything had shifted overnight. The language was clinical. No names, no drama. Just revised protocols, mandatory training updates, and a single sentence buried near the end about zero discretion in cases involving harassment, discrimination, or improper seat displacement. That sentence was the point. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and stepped forward when the barista called her order. Steam hissed. Cups clinked. Life continued with indifference to the systems reshaping themselves beneath it. By the end of the week, the changes began to surface in small, almost invisible ways. A crew briefing that ran longer than usual. A supervisor who paused before advising accommodation and instead asked who was compliant. A junior attendant who no longer felt the knot in their stomach when enforcing a rule against a loud passenger because the rule was no longer optional. Renee watched it happen from a distance the way she always did. She did not insert herself into the narrative. She never had. Influence worked best when it did not demand credit. In Chicago, Jason sat in a small training room with a handful of other attendants, hands folded, spine stiff, replaying the moment he had asked a woman to give up what was rightfully hers in the name of speed. The instructor spoke calmly without accusation. Systems fail when people are trained to fear delay more than harm. Jason felt the sentence land hard and clean. It did not crush him. It clarified him. In the cockpit of another aircraft, Captain Bennett reviewed the updated procedures before departure. She nodded once and closed the document. This was how it should have been all along. In London, Renee attended meetings unrelated to aviation, her presence steady, her contributions precise. People listened without knowing why. They trusted her judgment so completely. Trust she knew was built long before it was visible. The man who had blocked her seat did not disappear. He filed appeals. He complained to friends. He blamed policy and politics and anything that spared him the discomfort of reflection. The appeals were denied. The complaints faded. His access narrowed. The world adjusted without consulting him. That was how accountability worked, when it was real. It did not shout. It did not chase validation. It simply rearranged what was possible. On a flight 2 weeks later, a woman in a worn jacket boarded late and found her seat occupied. The attendant did not hesitate. The situation was resolved in under a minute. No raised voices, no bargaining. The plane departed on time. The woman sat quietly, unaware that her dignity had been protected by a decision made at 30,000 feet days earlier. Renee heard about that flight in a report summary, one line among dozens. She read it once and moved on. Change did not need witnesses to be meaningful. On her final night in London, she stood again by a window, city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. The air outside was cool and clear. Somewhere beyond the skyline, aircraft traced paths she could not see, each one carrying people with stories, assumptions and vulnerabilities of their own. She thought of her father again, not as a memory, but as a principle. Fix the part before it breaks the system. Respect the machine by respecting the people inside it. She did not regret the confrontation. She did not replay it. Regret and replay were luxuries she had learned to abandon early. What mattered was what came after, and that was already in motion. The next morning she boarded another commercial flight. Different airline, different crew, same quiet posture. No one recognized her. She preferred it that way. Power that needed recognition was already losing its edge. As she settled into her seat, she watched a young attendant move down the aisle, voice-confident hands steady. When a passenger questioned an instruction, the attendant responded without apology, without aggression, just clarity. The moment passed. The system held. Renee smiled faintly and looked out of the window as the aircraft began to taxi. The story that had started with a stolen seat did not end with a punishment or a headline. It ended with alignment, with systems nudged back toward fairness, with people supported instead of pressured into silence. It ended the way real justice often did, unnoticed by most, but deeply felt by those who needed it. And if this story stayed with you, if you've seen moments like this in your own life, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Tell your story.